I think when we think about the challenges of group work, we need to recognize that there are challenges both for students and for lecturers involved. So for students, they might not feel confident, they might not have extensive group or teamwork experience, they might feel that they're out of their depth with skills, and especially if group work is very well designed with, for example, peer evaluation and other elements, a lot of students have never experienced this before and feel out of their depth. So there is a whole range of challenges for students. And then, of course, there is a whole rake of challenges for lecturers who decide to use group work, assessed group work in their courses. So I think it's useful to recognize that these challenges often overlap, that the challenges for lecturers always involve challenges for students and vice versa, and to design group work effectively.
So I would, if I was getting into group work to start with, I'd start small. Start with a small exercise, talk to peers, find out how they do it, and start with a small exercise and build up. The other thing which is very important is that students need to be taught how to work in groups. Right? And again, the research says that when you put effort into scaffolding and explaining to students what the group work model that you're using and the different type of assessment techniques that you're using, if you train them up on that at the start, it pays off significant dividends as you're going forward. So there's a bit of front loading to be done, but if that's done early on in the program, right, that's good. And if there's some agreement or coherency between different academics on a program as to the approaches that they're using and the type of assessment techniques that they're using, if these have been introduced in another module before, well then you can take it that they know how to do that technique. So start small and train the students up in the group work techniques and the assessment techniques that are going to be used.
So I think reflection is a really important aspect of effective group work, that students need to think about their experience and what they've learned and what worked for them and what didn't work for them, and how they're going to apply that knowledge then they've derived from the group work exercise in the future. So I think if you can build in a reflective learning element, I think that's something I would strongly encourage. I'd echo for sure what Brendan said. I mean, it's a pretty good motto in general, I guess, that you start without being too ambitious and something that's manageable. When we talk about group work, there's many different scales of activity that you can do. There's activities which will be where you can provide some scaffolding and material in advance, and the students will be able to manage their process until the submission of the assignment or artifact at the end. And then there's ones where you'll need a lot more touch points in between. So I definitely recommend starting with one that needs fewer touch points, because that typically is where the process gets quite intensive from a staff perspective. It's also really important, though, that when we talk about group work, that, you know, sometimes people look at group work or project-based learning, which is often a mode of group work, and they see it as being incredibly resource intensive. But you know, you have to be sure you're comparing like with like. So if I have you know, a traditional lecture, for argument's sake, where I stand in front of a class and you know, talk about something for them and then expect them to go away and digest that, that's quite a different series of objectives of what I'm trying to achieve from a typical project, for example. So if the learning objectives are more substantial and the effort by the students is more substantial, then it's not unreasonable to expect that there might be a different level of work involved for staff. So you know, we need to make sure we're comparing like with like. So you know, don't be dismissive of group work and say that it's X, Y, or Z without actually thinking about what the upside of it is and what you're achieving.
So a common question that people ask is about group composition. So groups, you know, sort of 4 or 5 would be a good number. They can be randomly assigned. If you're looking for heterogeneity in the group, right? Yeah, so you're looking for heterogeneity in the group. You can try doing random assignment. If you know the students, it may be possible to do some placement or some mixing. You could try self-selected groups, right? But I suppose the gold standard is if you know the profiles of the students beforehand and you mix them based on types and capabilities. But that may always be possible. Another question which comes up is, do you use the same groups over long periods of time, or do you chop and change them? There's no right answer, but I mean, different people would try different approaches.
I have a very clear policy in my groups that I always let students self-select, but I give them individual assignments related to the group project, where there's individuals develop an outline for the project before they're allowed to form groups. So I also give them some input into the considerations they should go through individually and collectively. Most students will automatically pick their best mates if they know them. And I make the point that at work we don't usually work with the people we know best, but we're put together with people that have the same objectives, because the objectives are assigned. So in an assessed project, I usually try to get students to talk about their own individual aspirations, so that they're all in a group with similar aspirations. That cuts down on potential for conflict quite dramatically. The individual element is also a shingle they can hang out and say, this is the kind of quality of work I'm capable of doing. So it becomes almost a marketplace. Students that don't self-select into groups are assigned at the end. On the other hand, Brendan's idea of mixing students or randomly assigning them, all of them can be very, very effective ways of forming groups, all with their benefits and all with their potential implications.
So one of the techniques I use with groups I use with junior fresh students is I get them to do a Bellable analysis. So this is a simple psychometric tool as to what type of person you are, creative, completer, finisher, or a leader. And at least if they become aware of the fact that they do have strengths and competencies, and then they can realise what's happening and they can decide to develop some, or they can realise, well, actually there's a clash going on here in this group because we've got two strong dominating characters in it, and then either one of them changes their role, or in the next assignment we package it differently.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because it speaks to something that was mentioned earlier, which is the scaffolding, giving students the tools to learn to work in a group. So when you provide them with simple psychometric tools, for example, there are many different reasons why you do that. I mean, one is to try and get heterogeneity in the groups, as Brendan has said, but another is to give students a toolkit and a piece of information about themselves and about how different types of individuals will typically default or will act in certain situations.
So you need to put a bit of effort into it up front, right? But I would then go with Kevin's argument that if you invest in the scaffolding and the training to start with, and if you design your project and your assessment thoughtfully, then the learning the content that you can cover can be done to a deeper level, and you can probably get through more of it.
Yeah.
So I think the Trinity Education Project is asking us all to relook at how we do teaching and learning and how we do assessment. And this is at a programmatic level, at a year level, and at a module level. And I think group work and the various techniques for assessing group work have an integral and important part to play in how we deal with this going forward.